If you're curious about church planting, but secretly wondering if you should maybe just find a job as a pastor at an already established church instead, you're not alone. The thought of church planting can seem really exciting and fun at first when anything seems possible. When you start dreaming of what launch day could be like with 100 people on your launch team and 1,000 people in attendance and $1 million in the bank. I mean, it's super exciting and hopeful. But things can start to change pretty quickly when that small voice in your head starts asking those pesky what if questions. You know what I'm talking about? Like, what if no one actually chooses to follow and join the launch team? Or what if no one shows up on our launch day? Or what if I lose my health insurance? What if I can't raise the money that we need and I have to take a pay cut or become bivocational or whatever? Like, once those what if questions start going, all of a sudden the sparkle of planting gets a little less sparkly, right? And it's usually after that first round of questions that leads to an evening of like scrolling church staffing or Indeed, just to know that there are some more secure options out there, right? I got to know that there's other options that maybe I could take besides church planting, because let's be honest, the high risk involved in church planting can be a little too much for some people to bear, and that's totally understandable. But what if there was a way to get more clarity on whether planting a church is really the right step for you? Like, what if there was a way for you to acquire the confidence necessary to keep going despite those what if questions, to keep going despite the fear or loneliness or pessimistic thoughts that will inevitably creep in? Well, my friend, I think there is, and I'm going to show you how. But before we dive in, I want to first tell you about a way to gain a little more traction on the most terrifying part of church planting, I think, fundraising, right? And here's how. I want you to download my fundraising guide. If by the end of this episode, you are convinced that planting a church is in your future, then you need to download this guide. It features the top 5 lessons that I learned about raising money that helped us raise over $345,000 in startup funds alone for our church plant. And I want to give it to you just as a way of saying thank you so much for tuning in. All you have to do is click the link in the description, or you can visit churchplantjourney.com/fundraise. So when I was first getting serious about church planting, I was also having serious doubts. Seriously. Okay. I was simultaneously excited about the idea of starting a new church while being scared out of my mind. I believed that God could accomplish anything. I really did. But I also doubted that I was a good enough leader, that I was a good enough preacher, that I had any kind of vision worth following. Or I just doubted that anyone would ever want to be a part of anything I did. Now, that's part of my temperament and part of just how I'm wired, but I mean, it was overwhelming at times. So instead of just leaning into all that I knew that God really was asking me to do, which was to plant a church, I spent, or I should say, I wasted countless hours scrolling websites like church staffing, wondering if the sense that I thought I had from God to plant a church, maybe it was just a sense for me to look for like a lead pastor job somewhere else. A job that would have a little bit more security, that was a little bit more stable and more guaranteed to pay the bills. Can you relate to that at all? Again, if you can, that's super understandable. I've been there. And that's why I want to give you a few questions that you can ask yourself that can help you determine if you should keep pressing forward with church planting or keep dreaming about church planting despite the risks. Or these questions might help you determine that maybe you shouldn't do that. Like maybe you should consider some other options, which there's absolutely no shame in, by the way. As much as this world needs more church planters, we also really need a lot more pastors and leaders all throughout the church. So either option is really, really honorable. And I hope that by the end of our time together, you will feel encouraged and inspired to do either one of the options. So if you're currently debating whether you should plant a church or, again, take a job as a pastor or leader in an already established church, then let me start by saying this. At the end of the day, no one can really make this decision for you. It's literally up to you to figure out what God is saying to you. Because if God has made it clear to you that you're supposed to plant a church, then you need to plant a church. There's just no question about it. But if God is calling you to step into an existing church as a pastor, then you need to do that. No question about it, because obedience to God is always, always, always the win. Success is always just being obedient to what God is asking you to do. But if you're in a place where you are genuinely not sure. Maybe you feel like God has given you the freedom to decide for yourself, which I think happens. If that's you, then maybe you could literally see yourself doing either one and being happy doing either one. If that's the case, then it's time to start asking some really good questions that can help you discern what your next step should be. And that's where I come in. Today, I want to give you a few key questions to ask that might help you figure out which path could be the right one for you: church planting or taking a job as a pastor. Sound good? Okay, let's dive right in. First question that I want you to ask yourself is this: how much of a risk taker am I? Ask yourself the question, how much of a risk taker am I? As we've already talked about, planting a church is super risky. There's no guarantee that the church will survive, much less thrive. So by choosing to church plant, you are risking the fact that you will potentially spend a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of money on something that might not last. So you've got to let yourself imagine, even though it's hard, you got to let yourself imagine a worst case scenario and then ask yourself, like, what would that do to my heart? Like, if it doesn't turn out the way I want it to do, how is that going to impact me? Will I be able to shake this off, or will this haunt me? Like, you need to know yourself and need to know how you would respond in a situation like that. Because planning a church is risky. There is no guarantee for success. Now, I got to say this though. On the contrary, the truth is you are taking a risk whether you plant a church or not. You know that, right? Literally, whatever you choose to do next, if you're at a fork in the road, whatever you choose to do next is risky. Sure, there's no guarantee that a church plant will go the way you want it to, but isn't it true? There's no guarantee that taking a pastor job will go the way you want it to either. I mean, you could get there and like hate it, right? Or everybody could hate you. Like, I mean, there's no guarantee that you're going to be happy there or that you're going to be impactful there either. So you have to choose your risk at the end of the day. We all do. Every morning of every day that we wake up, we're choosing whatever risk we want to take. I mean, it's kind of like, think about it this way. It's kind of like investing in the stock market. It's always going to be a risk, but not investing is also a risk, because the $1,000 that you have stored under your mattress somewhere, I mean, it could be eaten by the dog, right? Plus, if you've got $1,000 stored in your mattress, it has absolutely no way of growing. No way. In fact, not only will it not grow, it's guaranteed to lose its value every single year because of inflation. So you are taking a risk when you invest, but you're also taking a risk when you choose to do nothing, right? You just have to choose your risk. And the same is true with church planting. Now, maybe this question will help you choose. Ask yourself this question for a second. How much, when it comes to risk, how much would you regret it if you didn't take the risk and try to plant a church? Think about that. How much, when you think about your future self, how much would you regret it if you chose not to try to plant a church? That was a really helpful question for me. Because when I turned 30, I was convinced that I wouldn't feel any different. I was convinced that, 30 was just a number and it wouldn't faze me at all. But I was actually super wrong. And I was really surprised by that, because on my 30th birthday, I remember like feeling a sense of discontentment. It was strange. And I explicitly remember thinking to myself, wow, 30 years went by really fast, really fast. And immediately after saying that, I had this other phrase came to mind. I thought, I'm going to blink my eyes, and before I know it, I'm going to be 60. Like, if the first 30 years went by that fast, surely the next 30 years is going to go by even faster. And I'll tell you what, at the time of this recording, I'm 36. I blinked and 6 years went by. It's crazy. And I remember, again, on my birthday, thinking about how fast time goes. And then I got this question in my head, and I feel like it was a God-given question. Jesus just seems to place the perfect questions at the perfect time. And it just felt like a Jesus question. All of a sudden, I thought to myself, when I'm 60, what will I regret not trying? Like, in the next 30 years, what am I going to regret not trying when I'm looking back on my life? And that's when I knew, when it comes to church planting, I would never regret trying and failing. Never, because at least I tried. but I would regret not trying. I would never regret trying and failing, but I would regret not giving it a try. And I knew that even though I had a lot of what if questions going on at the time, like what if I fail? What if we don't reach anybody, nobody comes, whatever. I knew that in 30 years time, I'd have a whole separate set of what if questions to wrestle with. Like, what if I had tried? What if we did reach hundreds of people? What if we could make a difference on Long Island? So you have to remember that you're choosing your risk at the end of the day. Yeah, it could feel risky right now to move forward with church planting, but in 30 years' time, you may have a different set of what if questions. So, how about you? How much would you regret it if you didn't take the risk and try to plant a church? If the idea of risks like make you lose sleep and you'd rather build on something that already exists, then stepping into an established church as a pastor might be a better option, and it's a great option. But you need to be aware that there's risk there too. But if you are wired in such a way that not trying despite the risk would make you lose sleep, then church planting might be the way to go. And if that's the case, then you have to ask yourself this next big question. Okay. First question is, like, am I a risk taker? The second question is, how effective have I been at starting new things in the past? You got to ask yourself that question. How effective have I actually been at starting new things? I mean, this is common sense, but church planting is literally about starting new things, right? It's about starting from zero, new teams, new systems, a new culture, new everything. So you should ask yourself, do you have a track record of starting things that have actually worked, right? Like, have you been able to take things from zero, from nothing, from the ground floor to thriving? Now, obviously, it doesn't have to be a church, right? But maybe you started a small group. Maybe you successfully launched an initiative or a ministry or an outreach in your church that people really bought into and got involved with. Or maybe you started a business or a walking group. I don't know. I don't really care what it is. I just want to know, have you started new things and have you been able to follow through with them in such a way that they have really become successful? Like, they've really thrived. You've hit the goals that you wanted to hit, whatever success looks like for you there. Because that ability to start new things is a non-negotiable for a church planter. It is your job as a church planter. And the job that I had before I planted, I took part in starting a ton of new things. I had the opportunity of starting new groups, new small groups, new teams, new systems. I also led the charge of starting and completing several building projects. And I didn't know it at the time, but all the lessons that I learned while creating all these new things and leading change really came in handy when it came time to plant a church. I mean, I'm so grateful for all the experience I was able to take with me. So if you've been able to really rally people around a vision and then see it get accomplished, that's a good sign that you might be wired for church planting, because you need to be able to do that as a church planter. But if starting new things isn't necessarily your strength, again, that's totally okay. You just might thrive more in an existing church where the foundation is kind of already there. And instead of starting something new from the ground up, you're just maybe leading some change slowly rather than birthing something completely fresh. Make sense? Okay, so question 1 is, am I a risk taker? Question 2 is, do I have success starting new things? Question 3 is, do you have a specific vision in your heart? You got to ask yourself the question, do I have a specific vision in my heart? And my favorite definition of vision is just this. It's a preferred picture of the future, right? So I'm asking if you have a specific being the keyword, do you have a specific preferred picture of the future in your heart and in your mind? When you think about your future, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, even 1 year from now, like, what comes to mind for you? Is it specific? You see, I think as followers of Jesus, we've all got a vision built into us. It's just a part of it, right? Our preferred picture of the future is to see as much of the world come to love and follow Jesus as possible. I mean, after all, our lives have been made so much better by Jesus, right? So of course we would want other people to experience that too. So we've all kind of got that, or should have that kind of a vision. But sometimes people don't just have a general vision. Sometimes God gives people a specific vision. And it could be specific in many ways. It could be a specific location. It could be a specific people group or a specific method and approach to reaching people or a combination of all those things. Whatever it might be, I'm wondering if that's you. I'm wondering if you have a specific vision for the future or if it's just kind of general. If it is specific, again, I think that that's a sign that God might be nudging you toward planting. For example, I worked as an executive pastor for several years in the Midwest before I planted. And one of the reasons I knew I needed to plant was the fact that I was completely content with my job and quite good at it. And yet I could not shake this vision that I had that didn't align with where I was. You see, at the time, our church was thriving. I mean, we were growing like crazy. My life was literally as good as anyone could want their life to be. Like, I lived in a 3-bedroom house. I had a few cars, no debt. I was surrounded by loving friends, loving family, a church that I absolutely adored, a job that I loved. Honestly, I wanted for nothing, except during the last year of my time there, I could not stop thinking about Long Island, New York. And I did not know why, because I just had this vision of planting a church on Long Island that would be appealing to people who didn't like church, a church that a busy Long Islander could come to, could be a part of, and feel safe to explore their faith and eventually be inspired to love and follow Jesus. Now, I knew that this wasn't my vision because at the time, I just didn't care about Long Island. I mean, I grew up there, but I really never wanted to go back there. It's expensive. It's crowded. There are potholes everywhere. Yet I just could not shake this vision that was in my heart. I couldn't stop thinking about Long Island. God had given me this specific preferred picture of my future. And despite the fact that I had everything I could ever want where I was, I know I would never have been able to be content living in the Midwest when God gave me a specific vision for the Northeast. So, what about you? Do you have a specific vision for someone, for somewhere, for something? If so, that could be God gently pushing you to plant. But if you don't really have that kind of clarity, I mean, if you're just kind of pretty comfortable just influencing whoever God brings into your life, and you don't really find yourself regularly daydreaming about being somewhere else or reaching certain people in some certain way, then that might be an indication that pastoring an existing church is the best option for you. And again, that's a great option. We need more pastors. How much of a risk taker are you? Have you had success launching new things? Do you have a specific vision in your heart? And finally, the fourth question you got to ask yourself when you're determining whether or not you should plant a church or just take a job at an existing church. The fourth question is probably the most important question, and that's this: how healthy am I? You got to ask yourself, how healthy am I? And then I want you to add the word really at the end of that, okay? Don't give yourself a generic answer. Really, be brutally honest with yourself. This is between you and God. How healthy am I? And I'm not just talking about your cholesterol or your sugar levels, you know. I'm talking about every part of your life. Like, how healthy are you? Because church planting will test you in every single way. It'll test you emotionally, spiritually, physically, relationally. So if your marriage isn't healthy, church planting will only make it worse. I promise you. If drowning in debt is a problem that you have right now, church planting will only make that problem worse. If you are carrying around bitterness or burnout, church planting will only make it worse. Don't make the mistake of thinking that planting a church will fix the problems in your marriage, your wallet, or your heart. It won't. It won't. It will only magnify wherever you are right now. So you got to ask yourself, how healthy am I really? If you evaluate your marriage, or you evaluate your finances, or you evaluate your spiritual disciplines, or your emotional intelligence, your emotional heart, and if you discover that you are in some serious need of like medical attention or divine intervention in those areas, then that should be an indication that now's not the best time to plant. Instead, you should really be focusing on getting well. In fact, I'd also say if you're not healthy in any of those areas, it's probably not the best time to take a pastor job either, right? Like, the only caveat is that in an established church, you'll probably have more resources and more people who can support you on your journey to get healthy. But as a planter, like, the weight of everything will fall on your shoulders. And if you're not strong going in, it could crush you. because you really need a strong team to help you, which, I hope that you have as a church planter, but you might not have in the very beginning. So right now, if you've got, some big areas in your life that need some work, now's the time to work on them. Don't think that you're weak for taking some time to heal up. Nothing could be further from the truth. Taking the time that you need to heal is actually a sign of strength on your part. Once again, when I left my last church job before planting, I found myself leaving with a little bit of bitterness in my heart. Just a little bit, due to some hurtful things that were said and done before we left by people that we had really trusted. And to be honest, it wasn't just a little bitterness. I was just straight up angry. I was angry at a couple people. But because of God's goodness, it's only because of God's goodness and his grace. Here's what he helped me discover, actually pretty quickly, which I'm so grateful for. He helped me discover that if I allowed that anger to stick around without actually dealing with it, without acknowledging it and dealing with it, if I let it stick around, it would grow and it would keep growing. And eventually it would start to influence me. If you let anger live rent-free in your heart, it will influence you. It'll influence you the way you speak to other people, the way you react, the way you respond. It'll influence the decisions that you make. It'll influence the emotions that you feel. So I knew that if I let this anger stick around, it's gonna color the way that I speak to my wife and my family and my church, because that's what anger does. It will always make its way out. And when it does not care who is around. This is why you have dads who overreact and yell at their kids, even though what their kid did wasn't all that bad, right? It's because they're not actually mad at their kids. It's because they're mad at their boss, or they're mad at their teacher or their coach from 20 years ago, or they're mad at their own dad from their childhood. And now that anger that's been sitting there for years or decades, it comes out. So I remember praying in that time. I remember praying and just asking God, like, God, I need your help. Because my prayer was something like this. I know that my future church deserves to have a pastor that doesn't harbor anger and bitterness. I know my future church, they deserve to have a pastor who doesn't have a short fuse because he's angry about something that happened 5 years ago. Right? They deserve to have a pastor who doesn't make excuses for his anger, but deals with it. So I begged God, would you help me deal with this? Help me know how to do it. And at some point, I'll tell you exactly what that looked like, because it worked. But for now, I'll just tell you that God answered my prayer. And I am so glad that he did, because I don't think that I would have ever been able to carry the weight of church planting while also trying to carry the weight of undealt with anger. Just would have crushed me. So what about you? Are you healthy? Are you healthy? Look, we've all got room for improvement, all right, in all areas of our life. I'm not asking if you're perfect. I'm just asking, are you healthy? Right? Because even though we may have room for improvement, some of us have like airplane hangar size rooms of improvement in our life. And if that's you, don't wait. All right. Don't wait. Do what you have to right now to get well, to get financially well, relationally well, emotionally well, spiritually well, because your future church plant, or the future church that you have the privilege of pastoring one day, deserves to have the healthiest version of you. Make sense? Okay, so let's wrap this all up. If you're asking yourself the question, should I plant a church or should I just take a pastor job somewhere else? The very first step is to listen to God's voice. Take some time to chat with some wise and respected mentors, some trusted friends, and tell them what you're hearing from God, tell them what you're sensing, and have conversations about that and see if you can discern if God is really leading you one way or the other. But if you're still unsure, if God has just kind of left that decision up to you, then ask yourself these 4 questions. How much of a risk taker am I? How effective have I been at starting new things? Do I have a specific vision in my heart, a specific God-given vision in my heart? And how healthy am I right now, spiritually, emotionally, relationally, financially? Answering these questions honestly, it won't necessarily make the decision easy, but I think it'll make it a lot clearer. And clarity is often the first step toward action. Now, lastly, I want to say this. The truth is, anyone can plant a church, or anyone who can plant a church can pastor a church. All right. Just making sure I didn't jumble that up. Anybody who can plant a church can pastor a church. But here's what I want to say. But anyone who can pastor a church can't necessarily plant a church. You know what I'm saying? Anybody who can plant a church can pastor a church, but anybody who pastors a church can't necessarily plant a church. So if you could see yourself going either way, but through answering some of these questions, you've determined that you would be a good candidate for planting a church, then I think you need to plant a church. Like, I think that you're almost obligated to plant a church, because having the skills and vision necessary to start new churches is rare. So I think you should lean into that and go for it. Trust God and plant a church. All right. That's it for now. But before we go, I'd love to hear from you. If you're wondering whether you should plant a church or take a job at an established church somewhere, were these questions helpful at all? If so, let me know which one was most helpful to you. Just let me know in the comments if you're watching on YouTube, or you can always DM me on Instagram. You can find me at Church Plant Journey. Now, as always, I want to remind you that no matter what happens next, no matter what's in your future, I want you to know that you have everything you need to face it. Everything. Whether you step into a new position at a church that already exists, or you start taking your first steps toward planting a church, or you start taking your 100th steps in church planting. Wherever you are on the journey, you've got this. I believe in you. I want you to believe in yourself, not because of who you are, but because of whose you are. You are a child of God, and you have the Holy Spirit of God living in you, which means there is nothing that God can't do through you. So don't be afraid, trust God, and know I'm here cheering you on every step of the way. I'll see you next time.